Hi everyone, thanks for watching. You can support our work on our website, ageoftruthtv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, BitChute and Brighteon. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To be sure not to miss any of our shows, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruthtv.
Hey Leo, how are you?
Very well. Where are you?
I'm in Copenhagen. Yeah.
I'm back in Copenhagen.
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
You ended up your journeys around the world.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 22nd of September 2024. And our special guest today is a fascinating gentleman with a fiery Italian spirit who is always ready to share with us a lot of eye-opening and intriguing inside information, occult and esoteric knowledge, and the latest on the current hot topics on what is going on in the world today. He is an author of a long series of books, Confessions of an Illuminati, and he's on the show today to promote Volume 11 on MK Ultra Mind Control. So get ready because we have a lot to discuss on the show today with Leo Zagami. Good evening from Copenhagen, Denmark, and welcome to all of our viewers on Age of Truth TV. Please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. We have a really amazing and fascinating show for you today. Will be a fiery discussion, I'm sure, because we're joined by an old friend of Age of Truth TV. He's been with us many times, every time he publishes a new book, which he does quite a lot. He is back on the show to discuss the latest content of his book. Today, it's about MK Ultra and mind control. In fact, we're going to talk about both of his latest books, Volume 11 and Volume 10 of Confessions of an Illuminati. And it is a thrill, as always, to welcome back on Age of Truth, Leo Zagami, joining us from Palm Springs, California. Welcome, Leo.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on the Age of Truth, and I think it's becoming an encyclopedia, this series, so it's kind of never-ending. Since the last time, in fact, I put out this Islamic Freemasonry and the secret societies behind the eternal conflict in the Middle East, which offers a unique perspective about a subject that not many people know about. Because as we said before we started this show, you really need to go into the Middle East or Turkey, these Muslim countries, to have a sense of it all and to experience them. Otherwise, you will have always a detached and often twisted version and account of the events, because, of course, we don't really know that culture. We don't really understand it. It's a backwards culture, and at times, unfortunately, it's been misused and manipulated by our own Illuminati, our own Freemasons. And so that's the story I've been telling in Volume 10. While in Volume 11, there's a trade union between these two books because they both talk about 9/11. And of course, Volume 11 has also the 11, almost like the Twin Towers. But the symbols portrayed in the front of this book are very important, as well as the characters, you see, because up here we have Sun Tzu, which is, as you know, the author of The Art of War, Sun Tzu. Then under we have Alan Hughes, who is the first CIA civilian director who ordered the hit on JFK. And so we have then here also Thomas Crooks, and then on the other side we have Lee Harvey Oswald. And as RFK Jr. has just confirmed in his latest statement, which shocked America a little bit in the last few days with Tucker Carlson, the CIA was definitely behind Lee Harvey Oswald because he was recruited before going to Russia, contrary to the assertions that were previously made. And of course, he was part of this popular project made of many sub-projects known as MK Ultra, which is still debated to this day, but which formally lasted only until 1973.
But before we actually go into the content of your book and about MK Ultra and mind control, which I personally think is one of the most important topics to discuss when you want to understand the full picture of what is going on and the full global conspiracy, basically, of everything that is going on and the hidden hand that is orchestrating all of these horrible events going on in the world, and of course also JFK and Lee Harvey Oswald and all that. But I mean, I just want to talk about your books and your process here, because I mean, you spew out these extraordinary books full of knowledge and information constantly and at rapid speed. I mean, how is this even possible? Do you write extremely fast, and how is your process of putting all of this together?
The process is facilitated by having a lovely wife who stands by my side, cooks great food. We actually have here, and this is a surprise for your viewers, the Zagami Family Cookbook, which is the latest production that we have put together with wonderful color pictures of all the recipes. You see, my wife lived with me for 10 years in Italy, and so she learned really the tricks of the Italian cooking, and she herself came from Brooklyn, which, as you know, has also a vast cooking tradition which merges American and Italian cooking. So this book will make you eat like a king, and I highly suggest it for everybody.
I love Italian food. Italian food is my favorite.
I know you do. I know you do. I always see these posts from Italy, and
I am Italian by heart. I mean, my spirit is Italian. I know you are a real Italian, but I always love going there. It's my favorite country to visit. I'm telling you, Leo. It's
absolutely, and I'm looking forward myself, perhaps possibly now that I'm naturalized American and have renounced to the Italian citizenship for political reasons. Nothing to do with Italian culture, as you know. But I had to avoid the persecution. And so this year, after being naturalized and becoming an American in March, I formalized in the month of June, renouncing to my Italian citizenship, so I can just simply come back as a tourist and not be bothered, because that's what happens here. And I explained this also in volume 11. You see, within NATO countries, America has a unique position. They put together in 1949 this NATO treaty, as you know, but prior to that, in 1948, there was the Smith-Mundt Act that passed under Truman, and it was basically something to separate the American people from the rest of NATO. They were the ones that couldn't be psyoped, that no psychological operation could be inflicted on Americans, while instead the other NATO countries don't have any law to protect them. So they could be bombarded by both America as well as their own countries there in Europe. You see, this puts us in a unique perspective and in a unique situation. However, under Barack Hussein Obama, I tend to say Hussein because of his links with Islam, in 2012, they reformed, they amended this law, so with the excuse that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were pushing psyops on the minorities, Arab and Persians here in America and the United States. They opened up almost a Pandora's box of possibilities, because now we could still defend ourselves on the psychological operation legally, but it's a little bit more complex, because now they have amended this original law that was passed to protect. You see, after the Second World War, there was a lot more awareness about mind control. There was fear in the normal population that we could end up like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, brainwashed totally. So That's the difference.
But according to official documentation, the American government announced in 1973 that the horrific MK Ultra mind control experiments done and perpetrated against unwitting American citizens and victims were stopped and would never happen or take place again. And we, of course, know about the hearings, the trial on the MK Ultra experiments that took place in 1977 were quite a public affair. But I mean, how can anybody ever believe this all too convenient public statement that they stopped this MK Ultra project? And how could they believe that these mind control experiments would not be conducted since then and after then on an even greater and more massive scale, also obviously using other methods, probably now more than ever? I mean, what are your thoughts on this? You've been writing now extensively about the history of mind control. So, Leo, what is your take on this?
I have to correct you a second here, because yes, it's true that in 1973, they made this announcement, but nobody heard it because it wasn't until 1974 that the New York Times first, and then later on the Church Committee of the United States Congress, headed by Frank Church, and Gerald Ford's United States another commission that was issues for CIA activities, investigated and presented to the public. So in 1973, in theory, nobody knew about mind control yet. And it was only in the middle of the 70s that the whole thing erupted for the media in what seems almost an orchestrated psyop, a psychological operation per se. However, in my book, I go, of course, like I said, this is the history of mind control, a timeline that wants to project you in the present and also in the future. So once MK Ultra ends up its 20-year activity plan, which was from 1953 to 1973, which included also recruiting Lee Harvey Oswald, by the way, in Japan, and then preparing him from going to Russia and all the rest. In 1973, it's very conveniently, because of the Watergate scandal and all the paranoia around it, suddenly we have a CIA director who conveniently destroys most of the documentation. Because of all this paranoia that is perceived by the CIA, especially because, of course, we only know about one victim, Frank Olson, who in 1953 was basically thrown out of the window during one of these experiments. And the family was received by the President of the United States at one point to apologize to the family and all the rest. But this is only one of the victims. There's probably many, many more.
At least maybe 100 came out that we know of and talk about it. And thousands went through this program, huh?
Absolutely, Lucas. But you see, coming out about something like this is not always easy. So the ones that came out more vigorously were the Canadians, because of what happened with Dr. Cameron, this Scottish doctor who suddenly, thanks to the money given by Rockefeller Foundation, ended up in Canada experimenting on patients. And some say he was probably experimented anyway, even without the CIA support. But because he became himself the psychiatrist of the wife of the head of the CIA, the first civilian head, so there was this very intimate relationship there. And the Alien Memorial Institute, which, by the way, was only closed down 9 years ago, it was still used in Canada as a mental, which is pretty scary that an institute like that could be kept alive after all the scandals. You see, Canada has a particular connotation within the New World Order, is particularly submissive. We know for a fact that during the pandemic, with a report by the Ottawa Citizen that denounced the whole thing, and then later on by an investigation conducted by the Canadian military, that there was a vast psychological operation conducted on the people of Canada. Now, that is once again a criminal activity conducted on unwilling citizens. It's not, you see, we have to distinguish here. Psychological operations are not MK Ultra, are a different kind of thing, because MK Ultra was based on coercive methods and brainwashing, which is inflicted on a single person. It could be a volunteer, it could be unwilling. We know that initially they were volunteers co-opted mostly in military bases. Later on, with Operation Midnight Climax expanding from New York to San Francisco, they transformed basically San Francisco in a living laboratory. And what happened then? In those 20 years, flower power came into existence. The Church of Satan came into existence in San Francisco. Many different facets of the Age of Aquarius, if you want to call it, of the dark side of the Age of Aquarius, if you want to call it like that. So my book explains the differences and categorically denies certain assertions that unfortunately, Lucas, have started to circulate after the arrival of the internet, making of MK Ultra something of a urban legend or a pop phenomena cited by singers in songs, in movies, in film, TV series, and so on. Often exaggerating certain aspects, at the same time also normalizing it almost. You know, when you create a film like American Ultra, which is almost a comedy, and you are normalizing something like that.
But they do that about the most extraordinary things that they're actually putting out there. And it's also, it's like telling people ahead of time, or I mean, even if we go back to the very legendary Manchurian Candidate film from 1962,
Absolutely.
right?
And I cited that in my book because it's a very important movie. Both the Manchurian Candidates from 1962 and the one later on with Denzel Washington have two important messages. Now, the one from 1962 will be eventually censored in 1963 after the death of JFK for 20 years. A lot of people don't know that. But Frank Sinatra asked JFK to put out this movie, asked the permission to JFK to put out this movie. And so this movie is incredible because it's actually presenting to us what was written in a novel that was published in 1959, in a scenario, of course, in which the main techniques were hypnosis, coercion, use of drugs, and all that to inflict on this Manchurian candidate that will eventually go and attempt to kill a Republican figure in the case of the first movie, while instead the Republican candidate to the presidency, while instead in the other movie, a Democratic candidate.
And clearly showing a trauma-based mind control victim, the character that Lawrence Harvey played.
Absolutely. And he plays it splendidly. I think that the way we see the opening, of the Manchurian Candidate, the New Jersey Garden, the fact that they are imagining themselves to be in a completely different situation, whereby they are actually being manipulated by Soviet and supposedly Chinese scientists, while instead they're thinking they are interacting with the ladies of the high society there in this scene. But the incredible thing about it is also that in the second movie, for the first time, they touch on the subject of implants. Now, the subject of implants wasn't mentioned in the first novel and film because very little was known at that point. But they were already using implants because people think.
So you think that they were using implants like microchips already back in the 50s and the 60s?
No, they were not microchips. They were electrodes. It was much more primitive form of implant, but they existed and they are proved scientifically. In fact, in my book, I have, this character here, Howard Hunt. Now, this guy in front of the Watergate Commission is actually the guy who was in charge in Dallas the day of JFK's murder, and he wrote a book under another name, Lincoln Lawrence, We were controlled. Now, this book is very important because it was the first book of its kind that came out in 1967, when nobody knew anything about mind control. Suddenly, this book came out and gave a detailed history of implants from the 1930s, 20s. I mean, from the first experiments of Ivan Pavlov, they went directly in trying to localize those areas of the brain that could be activated. We're not talking, I repeat, of BCIs, which are brain-computer interface, much more sophisticated, or forms of nanotechnology like the recently announced one by the Basic Institute of Science in South Korea. Just a week before the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, they announced that they mapped the brain of these mice with nanotechnology. They invented this nano mind control that can literally transform us in robots, you know, remote control, which is really scary. However, the implant, the possibility that Lee Harvey Oswald was implanted with an electrode, well, is stated by this book. However, because Howard Hunt was a CIA operative, on the contrary of what we know today, even from RFK Jr., they were blaming it on the Russians. They were saying that Lee Harvey Oswald had received the implant, and it says in this book which I cite, We Were Controlled, that basically he had been given an implant while he was in Russia. A good way of blaming always, you know, the Russians. You know, today, who we blame? Putin, you know, in anything possible and imaginable, we have this constant cognitive warfare. And when I talk about cognitive warfare is the ultimate form of mind control, which is being developed now by NATO, is the successor of psychological operations in many ways, when they are conducted merging psychological warfare, data centers, AI, algorithms, and so it becomes even more diabolic.
But they have actually done psychological warfare since Operation Paperclip and Operation Mockingbird, which was introducing the media and television and brainwashing like a collective kind of mind control, which is what is happening on a massive scale today, which is extraordinary.
That happened after the end of MK Ultra, the formal end of MK Ultra, 1973. In that same year, the director of the CIA ordered to map the brain. So while they were going, leaving MK Ultra on the side, something new was coming together. And people at the end of the 70s, early 80s, new forms of mind control came together. Within psychological warfare, people like John B. Alexander, his Grandmaster Michael Aquino, Stapledine, all these people, of course, then inspired The Man Who Stared at Goats, the movie also, aside from the novel, the account brilliantly said, we are in front of new forms of mind control. Michael Aquino disliked MK Ultra. I had a direct relationship with Michael Aquino for a period because when I was in the Monte Carlo Lodge, I was in correspondence with him, and we had, he was like a pen friend. I know he's the most unlikely character to have a pen friend, but at that time when I was within the Illuminati, it was that kind of thing. It was normal.
I think we've spoken about this before on the show, that you knew him, Leo, and I think also a lot of the audience will be a little bit startled and outraged by that fact, because he is such a notorious and terrible, horrific man, a Satanist and a pedophile.
We have to distinguish here. You see, in my book, I also dedicate a whole subchapter, a note on clarifying my own experience with Michael Aquino. I also include one of his emails and stuff regarding a specific subject. But what happens is here, Michael Aquino, we know about the scandal in the Presidio daycare in San Francisco. He was part of the 7th Battalion of Psychological Operation in San Francisco, at the time stationed in San Francisco, now they're stationed in another city here in California. This book doesn't focus on the satanic elements of Aquino, because as you know, I touched them in other books, like Invisible Master, his Rituals and Bever's book. It doesn't do that. This book focuses on his professional psychological operations involvement. The influence of his essay, The Psychology of Victory, published in 1980, by the way, Commander Valelli, who then went on to become a very important figure on TV, on Fox News. So, I mean, it was a general, so these people in the psychological operations world often end up like military commentators on TV because then it's ideal for them to place themselves in a new situation. But from the end of the 70s, these militaries started to expand the concept of mind control, wanting to also pick up some certain elements from MK Ultra, but disliking certain others. Like I said, people often associate erroneously Michael Aquino with MK Ultra.
But Leo, I must jump in just quickly here. A lot of these previous MK Ultra victims who came out and spoke publicly, many of them have mentioned Michael Aquino, and
no, but I won't explain it. That's why I won't explain.
But Leo, that they were abused by him, that he was a massive mind controller.
You see, the Presidio Day care scandal in the 80s definitely was hiding something vicious, like the possibility of pedophilia. We know the testimony of certain children, and everything was conveniently silenced by the military. But why it was conveniently silenced? Because they were making use of his work, and that's why I want to focus on his work. In my book, I state that he was suspected of that. He was never condemned, obviously, and I even state he was never condemned.
Because he was, of course, protected by the top elite, like all of them.
But then you see the problem here, Lucas, is that people then don't focus on the importance on his work on the military field, because when you start seeing what he did in the military field, that's even more scary than whatever plots or whatever Katie Bryant transformation of America you have in your mind. You see, when we talk about Project Monarch, there is actually in the sub-projects of MK Ultra, many sub-projects, and we don't really know about anything called Project Monarch. But we know, for example, about sub-project 68, which was the one involving Cameron in Canada, which made a lot of damage with his so-called psychic driving and his techniques, electroconvulsion, drugs, induced coma, and so on.
Dr. Ewan Cameron, huh?
Yes. He was the guy who definitely facilitated this kind of experiments outside of US territory for a specific reason. They always wanted operated following the clause of plausible deniability.
The reason why it's not talked about in public is probably because it's so horrendous that these sex slaves were programmed through mind control and trauma-based mind control.
Already in those sub-projects, including sub-project 68 and many others in the 162, some say 168 sub-projects of MK Ultra, we find those horrific elements that are part allegedly of Project Monarch. But because I wanted this book to be taken seriously by the academic world, and it became #1 bestseller in medical experimental psychology, I have to have evidence. You understand? My father...
But what is evidence, Leo? Because if you can't find it, because they're taking it away.
Lucas, my father was Dr. LYON ZAGAMI. I have a legacy. He worked for Project MK Ultra in Paris at the Sorbonne in the 60s. So I had to be methodical in my assertions. Otherwise, there will be medical doctors and staff that will say, you don't have any evidence. Instead, the things that are asserted in this book are proven. And that's why this book is being taken seriously in the academic establishment. I know about what you're talking about, but I want this book to expose these people and still not be called a conspiracy theory book. Because, Lucas...
But with all that you have written and talked about publicly, Leo, I mean,
everything I
no holds barred.
But everything I told public, I can demonstrate. That's the thing, Lucas. I was arrested for espionage in Norway for a reason. I had to leave Italy in 2019 and change my citizenship for a reason. So everything I have said, I always, in my books, have to have the documents to prove it. I'm not saying it's not true, Lucas. I'm just saying that in my books, I have to put evidence that is proven because I'm putting my life on the line. And at the same time, I also want to avoid the stupid lawsuits and other things that have ruined people. But at the same time, I know that it's important to reveal things in their entirety. So what I did in this book is actually revealing things that will shock people far more than Project Monarch's alleged existence. Because when, for example, in 1980, John B. Alexander published in Military Review, The Battlefield of the Mind and the Use of Psychotronics, that is pretty shocking what he was asserting. And then the use of remote viewers and whatnot. That is pretty the fact that, you know, they wanted to use the mind in a way, they were so obsessed in Fort Bragg, they had this experiment with the goats to try to kill them with the power of the mind and all that. I mean, it's pretty shocking. But the fact is that when we see the technology that we have today, well, we start seeing that Michael Aquino's mind war and what he asserted in 1980 is now becoming a reality in cognitive warfare. We don't have to forget that Michael Aquino, that retired as a lieutenant colonel, he actually visited all the NATO bases in Europe in the 80s, teaching these techniques. So now that these techniques are being used, even in the latest war with Russia, that NATO is basically fighting through Ukraine, and this cognitive warfare has even a new command center here in Norfolk, Virginia. We need to know about how it was born. And then we see François Clausel, officer, French officer, 2002, the École Militaire Économique in France started the studies on this kind of things. And then we go back to France because France has a vast and rich tradition also in MK Ultra and mind control research. So that's why I don't, I mean, I did other interviews with people even who know very well Katie O'Brien, who have been interviewed. I always say to these people, I don't have anything against what she's asserting or the transformation of America and all that. But the thing is that what I'm asserting has to be proven. And it has to be proven because I am making a point in the academic world. And that's why this book is being taken seriously.
You're also, well, being controlled or controlling yourself, not totally going all in like somebody like, well, our mutual friend Jordan Maxwell or David Icke.
No.
You used to do that, didn't you, Leo?
No, Lucas, I go all in. I go all in because, I mean, up to this day, I don't think there is anybody that has written what I've written in volume 10 and in volume 11. For the first time, the existence of the Cairo Lodge, the manipulation, the foundation of Salafi jihadism, Wahhabism, how it was created, the military intelligences involved in the development of the Muslim Brotherhood up until Hamas, Hezbollah, and all that.
Very true, yes. And you are very thorough in all of that. That's quite fascinating. And there are so many amazing chapters.
And in my latest book, I mean, this is the only book that tells you that Thomas Crooks was cremated conveniently on the 23rd of July, 10 days only after he attempted to, and that his parents are both, of course, trained in mental health because they're both therapists, and they were viewed outside of a supermarket with a full trolley on the same day he was allegedly cremated, and that the fact he was allegedly cremated the 10 days after the attempted assassination that happened while the cremation of care was being conducted in the Bohemian Grove. Well, my book brings you a realization of all these events and how the difference between, for example, a Thomas Crooks that wasn't possibly a voluntary and an MK Ultra, you know, after the attempted assassination, everybody went on the internet and started to say, he's an MK Ultra, this and that. So much that the CIA had to intervene and say, no, it's not the case, which is very suspicious of them. But why? Because in reality, even if MK Ultra lasted 20 years, the products of those experiments lasted until now, and they pervade the whole of the mental health issue. When you have the American Psychologists Association that is so corrupt, so entrenched with these experiments, I mean, Dr. Cameron used to be the head at the time. I mean, while he was doing those hideous experiments, was the head. I mean, my father had to leave altogether psychiatry in 1975, which was a hard decision for my family, which I suffered for, when he decided that the political abuse of psychiatry, what the Tavistock Institute was doing, because we don't have to forget also the role of the Tavistock Institute, previously also the Tavistock Clinic, and the fact that even myself, I can testimony with certainty that in early 2014, I was brought in to a medical unit forcefully by the Italian Carabinieri after I started the pitchfork insurrection in Italy, with the threat made by a professor, Giuseppe Nicolò, who stated in front of my lawyer that he was part of the Tavistock Institute. And the Tavistock Institute has even an office in the rear office, in the rear of a bank in Florence. They have an office in Italy.
Do you think that your father, who was a psychiatrist, who worked with this and also knew so much about mind control, do you think that he in a way protected you from not being influenced or not being indoctrinated, put under mind control yourself as a child?
Absolutely. It teach me a few things, even of the use of LSD itself. When I experimented, because he experimented LSD in France for MK Ultra, so he told me exactly what kind of substances they used to use. So if you went too out of it, you have this emergency thing, which basically you could use, that he teach me how to use. So I mean, and you can put also lemon that brings down the effect. So he teach me all kinds of techniques surrounding and describe in detail the experiment, because what happened with my father is that he was interested in those links also with the paranormal so much that in 1975, when he left the academic world, he left it also because Sandoz Laboratories stopped the production of LSD. They had sold those few $100,000 to the CIA that then didn't purchase more. The program was shut down. He couldn't find in the academic world LSD to continue his research. So I remember myself as a kid having to go to these hippie communes to purchase LSD, and it was in my mind, you know, I mean, I lived it directly. This is like experience. So that's why when you say you don't want to reveal, no, I reveal my own experience. I don't want to talk for other people when I don't know with certainty. That's why it's
no,
very
but that's
important.
fine, Leo, but I need to ask the questions. The audience.
No, the question is fine. But I also have to say, this book are what I know. I don't talk for other people. I can't talk for other experiences, because you see, what happens with a lot of so-called researchers in the conspiracy world is that they don't talk for their own experience. They talk of other people's experiences, including people like David Icke have been brought for a ride by witnesses who are not credible, and himself ends up losing credibility. But David Icke himself has invited me on his own channel next week. So, I mean, it's about having, I feel that I'm giving myself a possibility here, also of redemption for my father's work. Because my father was really shocked when he discovered the political abuse of psychiatry in the Western world. He thought it was only being conducted in the Soviet Union. That's what they tell you even today when you go, if you Google political abuse of psychiatry, and you get Soviet Union. You don't get the fact that in Norway, in Italy, in England, and in all the Western world, in America, they conducted these hideous experiments of the political abuse of psychiatry. I remember when I rebelled to the Illuminati, back in the days when I was living in Norway, they locked me up in a place called Lovisenberg, and then I had my friend Thomas Hall, who then later on worked for the Ministry of Finance in Norway, who was part of my lodge, who came there to save my ass, basically, from these people who wanted to brainwash me. And he said, I remember we sit down in this table in the Lovisenberg in front of all these doctors, and he said, we know very well that this hospital has been conducting in the 70s experiments for MK Ultra. And they were like, whoa.
And it was a mental institution, right?
Yes. It was Lovisenberg. Everybody knows in Oslo, if you ask, Lovisenberg Hospital is today still a mental institution, but at the time had been used for MK Ultra. And after basically 20 minutes, I was out of that place.
We also talk on this channel about everything from Satanism, the political arena, what's happening in the world, and aliens and reptilians and psychic abilities and spirituality, everything. I mean, it's all connected, right? When you go into the field of the alternative, and also not to be limited about what is possible, because everything is probably possible in this holographic, three-dimensional existence that we're in, right?
Absolutely. I mean, then you go back to the old maxim of the old man of the mountain that people like William Burroughs or Brian Geiser liked very much. Nothing is true, everything is permissible, or whatever.
And probably mind control is probably the oldest tool, power tool used by the top elite of the day, even back to the days of the Anunnaki.
Absolutely. Everything, I mean, like we said, everything is possible when it comes to mind control and religion, because religion is a very powerful tool. I mean, at the same time, there is genuine religion when we have our own relationship with God. But once you have institutions, and then we have certain religious books, like, for example, the Quran is much more used for mind control. Why? Because, like I explained in volume 10, we go back to the fact that when they started the Crusades, even the Pope had to send his emissaries around the Middle East and get inspiration from the Islam, because the Bible never talked about a holy war. So nobody, up until the year 1000, nobody in the Christian world will have ever killed themselves in the name of this holy book, because Jesus never asked us to do that. It was contrary to his, to his revelation. I mean, up until the second coming, nothing had to be violent in any way, shape, or form. So when they had to create these knighthoods, like the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knights Templar, they had to go to places like Syria, places like Egypt, and other places to see the secret societies within the Middle East, what they were doing. And they found, in Persia in particular also, secret society called the Ashashins. The Ashashins were founded by a member of the Cairo Lodge, the Hassani Sabah, with the Nizari, who were a Shia schismatic sect, which still exists, by the way, but not in the same form, because they were not eliminated by the Sunni Muslim that tried for many centuries, but eventually they will be eliminated, their castles and fortresses, by the Mongols. However, the Templars not only imitate the way they initiate, the way they were dressing themselves, and the way the fortresses were built on the concept of defending the pilgrims also, because there was this ribat concept in the Muslim world that also was established. As fortresses where holy people, like Sufis and stuff, or militaries will go there and protect the pilgrims that will pass along. That's the Templars then ended up doing that for the Christians. And the Templars allied themselves secretly with the Ashashins, who were Shia, against the expanding Sunni that was Saladin. At the time, you see, Egypt was Shia, was Fatimid. Now, this is very important, because nowadays it's Sunni, and people don't really realize, though, that when Islam expanded, they were the new kids on the block, and they had to somehow absorb thousands and thousands of years of tradition and religions that, like you mentioned, the Anunnaki. I mean, here we're talking about ancient Mesopotamia, we're talking about ancient Egypt, and suddenly we have this new kid on the Islam. The Illuminati, who always existed since those times, they picked up this Quran, they watched it, and they said, what is this book? They were not really impressed with it, I tell you the truth. A lot of these Zoroastrians, Manichaeans, Gnostics in the Middle East, they were like, but we can use it to manipulate people. It's the ideal tool. It's a tool of mind control. 5 times a day.
Well, they knew how successful they were manipulating people with the Bible.
Yeah, but there was another level of manipulation. The level of manipulation with the Quran invites you also to a jihad that can be interpreted in 2 ways. And that is the interior way or the exterior way, the lesser jihad or the greater jihad. No? And of course, Muslims, if you go in the Middle East, will tell you, oh no, we reject violence. That's, no, we are for the jihad fought in ourselves and blah, blah, blah. But that's not the case most times. There is always this whole thing that was born from, while Islam was expanding, they were expanding in this way. The holy people in the book, the Quran, mentioned there is 3 holy people. There is the Christians, of course, there is the Jews. If you encountered them, you couldn't chop their heads off. They were people of the book, so you could only force them to pay an increased tax. Rather, that at times will convince them, oh, well, we don't like to pay this tax. We're gonna just become Muslim. Some people of a weak mind, they will do that. Other people will stay in there, and for that reason, we can say that both in the Fatimid, as well as successively in the Ottoman Empire, the Seljuk Turks of the beginning, there wasn't really many problems going on with the Christians and the Jews because they integrated simply by paying this extra tax. Okay? In reality, I come from Sicily. I'm half Sicilian. My name is Zagami. Zaham, this is Fatimid, this is Shia, this is directly from Iran. I have Iranian blood, in fact, in me. And the island where I come from in Sicily is called Ali Kudi in the Aeolian Islands, which is the Rock of Ali. That's a Shia. Sicily was Muslim for almost 3 centuries. So there is a long and rich tradition. The Sunni arrived first, immediately after Muhammad, one of his disciples. Later on, the Shia with the Fatimid took over, and an emirate was established in Sicily. If Sicily now is this splendid place full of oranges, lemons, and fancy food that you will not find anywhere else in the world, it's because it's a great merger of Middle Eastern and Italian food is the best. I mean, I have people from Rome or from Milan, they go to Sicily and they're like, what kind of food is this? What kind of food? This is the merging of culture. They forced them into planting new kind of seeds. It was really a great thing. But at the same time, it was also an evil thing when they forced 3,000 little children to chop off their whatever because they forced them into taking the Islamic tradition to the core, which of course has certain religious requirements, like as you know, after birth you have to do something with your okay, without going to the, yeah, well, yes, that is part of
circumcision, right?
Yeah, circumcision, but circumcision, voluntary circumcision is one thing. Forced circumcision of thousands of people done in the same day by force with the risk of dying because there wasn't antibiotics back then, well, that is an evil thing. So
terrible.
So you can imagine, and it was my ancestors also from my grandmother's side, the Normans, who instead liberated Sicily, and I still have in my house in Italy the paintings with the Saracens, the giving the keys back to the Christians symbolically for Sicily. I have these paintings, and these are the paintings that are historically, I think, very valuable because they represent a moment in history in which the Islam passed on their key to their Christian counterparts, who then retransformed, the mosque were then retransformed in churches, on the contrary of Istanbul, where it says the churches were transformed in mosques.
So what are your thoughts, just briefly, about the conflict in Israel right now? I mean, this is like more horrendous than ever, right? I mean, this is really a religious war, but of course we know that it's really a top elitist war.
Absolutely. There's a lot of misconception. That's why in volume 10, I describe how the Illuminati have infiltrated Christianity, they have infiltrated Islam, they infiltrated Judaism, and how they infiltrated those is very important because otherwise you risk to become anti-Semitic. So the Christians could have avoided the Crusades because that was the worst propaganda, the worst. I mean, after that, still today, you go into the Middle East, oh, the Crusaders. Well, actually, guys, you were the ones who inspired it because the Pope got inspiration from you. The way they acted after was inspired by the Muslims, so you need to tell them that, and I do it. But then you have you have the Christians, then you have the Islamic who were infiltrated from the very beginning. I mean, the Shia tradition is born out of a guy, Saba, who was a Jew himself, who was a heretical Jew, of course, for becoming a Shia Muslim, who launched this new branch of Islam, who gave more importance than ever to this figure who was Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, who married his daughter Fatima, and then all the descendants were respected in this new line. Now, you see, when it comes to Israel, they also had an infiltration of the Illuminati, and that is described in the last chapter of this book, and is Shabbatai Zevi, and later on, Jacob Frank. So the Sabbatai and Frankists are the ones. Nobody knows, for example, that Shabbatai Zevi, his father was working for the English intelligence, for the British intelligence. And that gives you already an idea, because in reality, what we find in Shabbatai Zevi is an early form of what is known as British Israelism later on. This thing of inviting back all the tribes to come back to Israel and do all that is actually a quite artificial construct because a lot of Jews were very happy where they were. They didn't want to go back to the Middle East, okay? But the Shabbatai Zevi thing gets even worse later on when we have, and this is very interesting, I think people should analyze it because behind, for example, the protocols of the Sages of Zion, which has become the most infamous piece of anti-Semitic garbage and propaganda in the world. But it has truth, of course. You would say it has truth. And I tell you why it has truth. Because we simply have to interpret it in a different way. It's not the protocols of the Sages of Zion, it's the protocols of the Sabbatean Sages of Zion. And at that point, you understand that's a minority. And it's not the race. That's why there's another misconception. The Khazarians doesn't exist because it's not a DNA.
So let me just jump in here, Leo. So this is an interesting topic. I mean, Jews and Muslims or the, I don't know if there's this thing called the Arabian race or, I mean,
the Semitic.
Would you say that Muslims or Arabs is that a race? Are Jews, is that a race? Or are they?
Jews is a race. Jews is a race because there is Sephardites and Ashkenazi. These are DNA proven races. Now, if I go like this.
But I mean, it must be a mixture of something else. I mean, every time we go from north to the south, the color changes of our skin, you know.
In fact, for example, you can notice that the Sephardic Jews are very much more similar to Arabs than the Ashkenazi Jews.
They look totally the same, maybe with a different hairstyle.
Absolutely. But in fact, when they infiltrate Hamas or Hezbollah, they use Sephardic Jews. They couldn't use an Ashkenazi with blonde hair from Germany because that's where they come from. That's where they implanted themselves and they developed. I'm partly Ashkenazi myself, so I know that they come from that part of Europe. Okay, so
the state of Israel was created and funded by the Rothschilds, right? And all of the Illuminati bloodline families. But they're all Jews, right?
That's why it's very important to understand who the Rothschilds are. And that's why in chapter 7 of volume 10, entitled The Infamous Protocols of the Sages of Zion, I explain how the Rothschilds are part of the problem here because they are Sabbatean. They're Sabbatean Frankists. And there is evidence for this. You see, the Damascus affair that started this whole anti-Semitism in the Middle East. It was the first widespread situation in which anti-Semitism erupted after there was the killing of a monk. And so there was this whole thing, this accident erupted. But when we go and study it, we know that the guy who intervened to protect later on the Jews was himself somebody connected with the Rothschild. So the whole thing is this. The Ottoman Empire, Lucas, you have been to Turkey, you have been to the Middle East, so what I'm telling you will kind of sound with you, I think. The Ottoman Empire, during the Ottoman Empire, there was stability, there was tranquility, mostly because Jews, Christians, and Muslims got along no problem. So what brought that instability? We just talked about the Sabbatean Frankists, but then we have to talk about the secret societies and the Freemasons who supported this whole thing. And of course, they use the Sabbatean lodges. I mean, most of the Turkish lodges that became important to bring down the Ottoman Empire and found the Young Turks were actually Sabbatean. The Sabbateans were in Salonico. Very important. Still to this day, they exist. The Dome are the Sabbateans. They are a reality. I mean, this is, they are a reality. We can't go back and describe how it was born. Well, briefly, we can say Shabbatai Zev in 1666 declared himself to be Muslim after he was half of the Jewish world has accepted as a Messiah. This was a shock for most of the Muslim world. For most of the Jewish world. The Muslim world didn't, I mean, the Sultan actually protected him and embraced him, but then it gave birth for those people who still wanted to follow him to a new thing, these crypto Jews who were professing Islam outwards, but they were still continuing the Jewish faith inwards. Now, the Ottoman census in 1878 recorded a Palestinian population, both Muslim and Christian, of 447,000, as well as a small Jewish community. So there was a small Jewish community in contemporary Israel of about, let's say, 4%, 15,000 people. Okay? Now, the people today say, to defend, the Palestinian cause, they say, oh, the Israelis were the invaders here because, we were here first. Guys, we have to understand here what happened. What happened is that the Illuminati and the Freemasons all over Europe, Russia, Germany, England, and then with the help of the Nazis later on, literally pushed the Jews that didn't have anywhere else to go because there were pogroms, there was the Holocaust, there was a persecution in a way that is undescribable. We're talking about millions of people who were killed. So that's
But this was also orchestrated on purpose, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Against their own people.
By the Sabbatean Frankists, who themselves didn't care about persecuting their own people.
No.
That's the crazy thing that people don't realize. They say, but then, how is it possible? No, it is possible.
They do it in order to change the laws and the course of history because they want to, because there's an end goal, right? The same with 9/11.
But also there is an end goal, as you know, the end goal is always money.
And power and the energy of power, and because these are occult magicians, you know a lot about that.
Now, when we go back to the Damascus affair that happened in the middle of the 19th century, in November, we are in November 1840, we were still more or less in a situation of Ottoman rule, but it wasn't really in that area so accepted. This powerful French Jewish Freemason lawyer and politician intervened, and that's where we start with the basis of what will become the Protocols of the Sages of Zion. Adolphe Crémieux, who died in 1880, had a central role in the development of this story, because he went to defend, of course, the Jews that were persecuted, but at the same time, he was connected with the Montefiore, with the Rothschild in England, and he was sovereign commander of the Scottish Rite. He was a grand hierophant of the Memphis Emesa. I mean, which is traditionally was used in the Middle East to sabotage the Ottoman Empire. France and England and Great Britain sabotaged the Ottoman Empire using these lodges, okay, and merging with the local secret societies and Sufis. There was an instrumental use for the last 3 centuries of these Muslim secret societies, even in Algeria, for example, in Morocco, where still Freemasonry is practiced to this day. They use instrumentally these secret societies to hijack, in the end, the Ottoman Empire, because the great enemy for them was the Ottoman Empire. And in the end, it collapsed. It collapsed. And when it collapsed, though, it reshaped the whole of the story. And if we have a problem now in the Middle East, it's because all those countries that are fighting against Israel today, they didn't exist before. They were all part of the Ottoman Empire. So, you know, now they're saying, okay, we want to have 2 states. 2 states. We have already so many Arab states. These Jews were, I repeat, persecuted. And now they are there. You can't tell them it's not their land, because you, if you were honest here, you will know that the United Kingdom has a big responsibility, much more than the United States, that didn't even exist in the international scene 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It was France who had a great responsibility. In 1916, they had the Sykes-Picot Agreement to divide the spheres of influence between the French and the English. You know, I take Egypt, you take Lebanon, you take this, and you for. And then when the Ottoman Empire fallen, all these countries were created simply by thugs who were working either for the Brits or for France.
One thing is the Jewish people and the Muslim people, and they should be able to live together, door to door, next to each other in peace. But I mean, the creation of Israel that we're talking
but the
about
problem
is a Rothschild, an Illuminati construct.
But the problem is here, once you create Israel, okay, at that point, you force millions of people who are being put in concentration camps to go there, or even before that, because it's from the end of the 19th century that the Rothschild started to push people to go there. And you have also the persecution in Russia. That was a serious persecution. I mean, in 1905, when the Tsar saw, I mean, that was where the protocols actually were published for the first time. Let's not forget that, and the protocols of the Sages of Zion were based on an experience of documented testimony that came out of the lodge of Adolphe Crignon. It was Maurice Joly from the lodge of Crignon who wrote the book which inspired the protocols, the actual writing of it, and then was passed on to the Secret Service of the Tsar. And the Tsar, when he saw that the Bolsheviks had a lot of Jews in them also, because there were Sabbaty and Frankists that were fomenting this revolution against the Tsar, well, of course, then it was anti-Semitic. But that's why, you see, then the protocols have a second life once they're published in Germany in the early 1920s, and thus led to the Holocaust, because the protocols were cited by Adolf Hitler.
But all of that was orchestrated. Don't you agree with
no,
it?
It's all orchestrated, but the fact that
it is a Hegelian dialectic, divide and conquer strategy to create these wars and these conflicts in order to separate people through problem, reaction, solution strategies.
Yes, but you can't say that Arafat is a hero when his uncle, the Grand Mufti, was next to Adolf Hitler and was
But
working.
you can't say that any of them are heroes. None of them. None whatsoever.
Absolutely. They are all played.
They're players, they're actors, and they're staged. They're being put into this holographic illusion to play this part so that we can be mind control, which is going back to the topic of your latest book, volume 11, because this is like a big jigsaw puzzle, right? All these puzzle pieces, and it's all about really
When I was
controlling the
initiated,
minds of the population, steering them in a certain way through this fear agenda, always about fear.
absolutely, yeah, I guess, and that's really also the power of the Quran, no, was
And
accepted
the
also.
Bible, Leo,
No,
and
no, but
the
let's stop it because because you have not been initiated in the OTO of Alistair Crowley, and I was initiated, and when my thing was blindfold was taken off, I found myself in front of Saladin. I didn't find myself in front of Jesus Christ. There was a guy dressed up as a Muslim, and so it was a Muslim kind of structure that even Alistair Crowley picked up after he was initiated in a secret society called ISWA, which is practiced between Morocco and Egypt. So you see, there is things that people don't know. And I actually had the compliments on this book, even by Sufis. You can go and check the reviews of this book on Amazon, and there is Sufis who say, well, and I'm not talking good about Sufis in this book. I say certain things. People say, "Oh, Sufis is it's like we have Rumi, we have all the Slav and all this poetry." No. We have also the use and abuse of the secret societies that often have intervened in geopolitical matters, while instead they're also claiming they're all about love and light. So, mind control is, of course, the subject of my latest book and is very important, but we don't have to forget that secret societies themselves mind control their subjects. And that is another topic that I touch in volume 11. The fact that a Freemason gets initiated or an Illuminati gets initiated, but then he gets also mind control. How does it happen? That is something not many people have revealed, and I have revealed in volume 11.
How does it really happen, Leo? Because we hear about that a lot, that they're mind controlling each other in order to gain something special, whatever people have, certain talents or something, but also in order for them to work for these secret societies, huh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have, let's make an example here. The Yale University Skull and Bones is quite known, so it's an example that I think your audience will. People always talk about the Skull and Bones because of their famous members, but in my book, I focus on the ritual, the fact that they have to stand in this imaginary tomb for a whole night and confess all their inner secrets. That is a process of mind control. Because you are confessing, it's like going to the psychotherapist, but then you are giving to the psychotherapist information that the psychotherapist is obliged by law to keep for himself. While instead, in this case, you have other members around you who are becoming participants of your inner secrets. Then you have also initiations, and initiations sometimes have hazing, they can be brutal. Now, I went through many initiations. I assisted also to many initiations. So in this book, I explain what happens. There is, for example, an initiation in the OTO devised by Alistair Crowley, in which a candidate gets put in literally in a sack and kicked around the lodge.
Were you?
Well, I mean, this is unfortunate, but that happens.
And did you also have to lie in a coffin? Which we hear about a lot, that people have to.
Well, that is symbolic. It happens also in Freemasonry reality in the third degree. But in fact, I also explain this. Freemasonry can be, a very respectable experience in which you are entering a contest, in which you are learning a lot from the old mystery school tradition, and it can become actually something that helps you. But if you happen to be initiated by a mind controller, and this I saw happening myself, then it's a completely different ballgame, because there is lodges, mostly irregular, to be honest, not so much in the regular network. I saw a lodge, for example, in Montpellier, where the candidate was kept with a boiling thing of coffee in his hand after he was initiated, and it was boiling. So the guy was melting his hand, and the master was ordered to stand still until he ordered to move. So the guy was in extreme, excruciating pain, and you could see, like this, and that was the mind control. So.
God.
I saw another time, and I talked about it in my book that even my wife experienced, because my wife said that she wanted to experience Freemasonry, and I gave her this possibility. We ended up in a lodge, though, in which she was put in a chamber of reflection with another guy who was initiated that day, who actually, and this was pretty shocking even for me, later on I knew, he didn't know he was initiated into Freemasonry. He was just picked up from a martial arts training center and said to go there to show up that day. And then he was brought into this, it's called Chamber of Reflection room, where they are meant to stay for a few hours in front of this skull, these ominous symbols and stuff, which themselves can be hypnotizing because symbols are hypnotizing. And I describe also the connections with satanic symbols and hypnotism. But in the end, he started to talk with my wife because they spent there a few. And when she heard this story, well, she understood it wasn't a regular thing. And so the guy basically left. That was good. I mean, he took his life in his hands and said, no, I don't want to be initiated. I didn't know I was initiated into this. And he left. But it was kind of extraordinary because I think it was the first time in my life I ever heard of somebody who was being forced into an initiation without knowing, because usually it's always voluntary. Usually people have to get a sponsor to bring them to the lodge, and there is a whole process. And I have conducted hundreds of initiations myself on other people, so I know what it means to conduct a honest initiation. But I also know that if you are an asshole and a mind controller and you want to prevaricate on a subject, well, once you blindfold them, you have a lot of control over a person.
And that's also basically what is happening in Hollywood, right? And I think we talked about that in an early episode with you, but also everything that has come out since we spoke about all of that with Diddy, P. Diddy or Diddy, whatever his name is,
and all I hope, as you know, Volume 8,
and all these rituals that all of these celebrities has to go through with these handlers, other celebrities and people. They go into these rooms, sacrifices and sexual orgies and whatever they have to do, and they film it, right?
Well, yeah, they get blackmailed after they get filmed and all that. Of course, I mean, when it comes to trauma-based techniques, we know that MK Ultra teaches a lot. That's why when I said earlier, MK Ultra might have lasted 20 years officially, but the results of those experiments are still felt with us today, because then they became a the patrimony of many other groups, like all those cults that started to flourish using those techniques. Even in Japan, they end up with those murders, those terrorist attacks in the underground because of that, of a mind control.
But those MK Ultra techniques are even more sophisticated and refined today, right? And happening on a bigger, much bigger scale.
No, today we shouldn't even call them MK Ultra, because now we have new programs.
Mind control techniques then.
Well, we can divide them into cognitive warfare, which I said is a new specialty, which has a command center for NATO here in Norfolk, Virginia, and it's becoming very sophisticated because it makes use of technology.
Like voice-to-skull technology?
Like directed energy weapons type of thing?
Well, then also there is, you see, Michael Aquino. Let's go back to Michael Aquino. In reality, a lot of what he envisioned couldn't happen back in the early 1980s because they didn't have the technology yet.
Maybe they always say that they have technology. They had technology that was 50, 60 years ahead, or maybe even 100 years ahead of what we're being told.
Already were developing it. But the concept was this. He called man Homo electromagneticus, meaning we emanate a magnetic field, but at the same time, an external magnetic field can intervene on us and can put us in a certain state of mind through frequency use from lights, things that are in a certain way. So when, for example, we have a guy like Donald J. Trump entering a studio with Kamala Harris for a debate, but who knows if those lights were put in a certain frequency and certain thing to get a certain reaction from him, and at the same way programming the whole thing as a massive psyop after maybe delivering in advance the questions to Kamala so she could train and be. on the game, that day. So, and now, of course, no wonder Trump is refusing another debate after the first
But that
experience.
whole thing is also a charade. That's theater, and it's also rigged, huh?
Everything that is happening at the moment in American politics is, though, of an historical nature, because we are living unprecedented times, Lucas.
Yes, we
So,
are. So who do you think, just for the sake of, well, a bit of fun, who do you think is going to win?
well, this is going to be the first time I'm going to actually vote here in the US. I have all my thing ready.
Are you really going to vote, Leo? Do you really believe in this voting system? Do you?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not really sure about California, because California is completely rigged more than any other state.
But the whole
However,
thing is rigged.
well, not the whole thing, because you see, here we have a constitution to defend, on the contrary of Europe. There is you have to understand that when in 1776, Washington and the other people established this nation, they did it to avoid what was happening in Europe. The Illuminati were born in a European mindset, but then, of course, here in America, we decided to have a republic rather than a monarchy. And this put us already in a certain frame of mind. However, there is a lot of weaknesses in this democratic context, in this republic, because then when you have people arriving in Washington, D.C., it's very easy that they get corrupted. Very easy.
But they're
easy.
all corrupt, and they're all related. They're related to the British monarchy and the European
you're talking
royalty,
about,
and related to each other even, all of the presidents.
You're talking about the leading families. I'm talking about the average Joe congressman who arrives there because he might have money, sponsors, and things, and he ends up arriving in Washington with maybe a good ideal in his head, but then sees the reality of things and has to compromise. Or maybe he is compromised because we know, it was even filmed in the rooms of Congress. They were having sex, and so this is basically they're filmed and then blackmailed. That is always done. That is, you see, we said about how they are controlled. Okay, so trauma-based manipulation in MK Ultra is actually something that we can find also in all forms of initiation. There is a trauma in initiation. The initiation in itself can't be easy, because if it was easy, you were not, the initiator says that, I mean, if I know the ritual in advance, a lot of people say to me, Leo, I would not have had the same experience if I knew the ritual in advance, because then it will have been for me very easy to just, it's a theater. It's like you playing a part in a theater, that's it. But instead, the surprise factor, the fact that you are blindfolded, the fact that you are brought to one edge, the fact that you suddenly hear noises, or you are thrown on the floor, or this or that. I mean, this creates at times even a trauma. And why is that? Because then once you are lifted blindfold on any kind of initiation, you are welcome amongst people who have the same experience. And then you will have to comply in this hierarchy which demands obedience. That's why a Masonic Grand Lodge, like the one, for example, in Denmark, is also known as an obedience. The obedience. And it's often a blind obedience from these sectarian realities. So the programming, there is a programming, like in any sect. When you join a sect, you are programmed. And in fact, if you remember, in the 70s, they started to emerge these deprogramming techniques that at times were very controversial, because people were picked up, like kidnapped from their families and put in a van and brought away in the woods to be deprogrammed and stuff. And there was actually cases in which there were people that had problems, legal problems after, because maybe in the deprogramming method they were even too strong, in the way. But today, for example, they are planning on using the AI. 10 days ago, Science, which is a important academic publication, announced what I already said here. Deprogramming today is the algorithms and the AI can operate, for example, an enhanced chat box that will convince you that your beliefs are erroneous, and they will try on different ways. Don't forget this about the cognitive warfare that we're subject today, that puts psychological operations to the next level. They can access all your data centers in a second. They can know exactly what you think, all your communications you ever made on the internet, everything, and they know exactly who you are and where, they can go with their questioning, with their proposing of something. So that is quite I think that Goebbels would have loved all this, I think it's only a dream for the Nazis to have some kind of technology like this. Today, unfortunately, this is technology that is operated not only by our enemies, but by our governments that are influencing. For example, when it comes to Ukraine, they want us to believe that Volodymyr Zelensky is a hero, and they will do anything possible and imaginable to project this idea, which we know is completely fake. The guy is just a recruited idiot comedian B actor who suddenly finds himself in the spotlight and is used as a puppet. But that's another thing. So I think that today we are in front of an unprecedented scenario in which, with the technology they have, they can look you in the eyes, and probably at the moment, while we are doing this show, they know exactly what you think and what I think, because the algorithms watches our facial expression and knows exactly what we think. So that is very scary, because we are in front of the possibility of losing our freedom of thought. And once they start inserting things, we're not talking anymore here about the electrodes we mentioned earlier. Now there is sophisticated implants, nanotechnology, stuff that, even non-invasive stuff that we could find in our body suddenly, simply by eating a salad, something like that. Then we can get really mind control and lose our freedom of thought. So we have to fight to keep our freedom of thought. Now, I'm not saying that these elections or that the candidate Trump is but at the moment, in this situation that we are living, my own personal experience is that Trump is a maverick. He's risking politically everything, but at the same time, we know he's no saint. But having said that, we are fighting the Illuminati, and the Illuminati traditionally support the Rome. And Trump is not the Rome for a simple reason. He is not in the Bohemian Club where you have the husband of Nancy Pelosi, even if it's a full-on Republican neocon kind of hellish center, the Bohemian Club. And that day, while he was getting shot, Nancy Pelosi's husband was watching TV in the camp of the military-industrial complex, hoping that Trump would be killed. So they want him dead. So if I want somebody dead, it means the guy is doing something to piss off the enemy. And if that's the case...
That's probably also staged, that whole shooting there.
No, it's not absolutely. Actually, the important thing is to understand, this guy went to Ukraine. He got mind controlled by cognitive warfare, which is used in the International Legion operating in Ukraine. You see, he went in Ukraine in the spring of 2022. Zelensky founded the Foreign Legion for Ukraine in March of 2022. At the same time, in June 2022, NATO came together with a special meeting and decided at that point, yes, we have to use cognitive warfare. We have to really brainwash the masses. And they saw this guy and they saw that he wasn't really good for war. He went there, he said himself, he wanted to fight. But they said, we can use you. They saw that he had some capacity, communicative capacity, and so they recruited him as a recruiter. But in order to do that, they had to program him. So he was programmed with a lot of hate. You have to hate Trump. You have to hate this because Trump is an enemy of this war. Believe it or not, in this situation at the moment, Trump is a maverick who hates, but Trump is risking the same as JFK. JFK was no saint. Bobby Kennedy was no saint. These people were no saints. I mean, apart from their ethics and morals in their private lives, I'm talking just literally also what they were doing. But they didn't deserve to die killed by the CIA and the deep state. And that's what happened. Because, otherwise they couldn't have done the war in Vietnam. They couldn't have done all their hideous wars. And so we have to really go for the less, for the less evil.
It's
here.
all a very complex and extreme game we are facing here on planet Earth while we are here,
But
right,
this-
Leo? We are operating on a very crucial, strange timeline right now, right? These are crucial times, changing times.
Absolutely. We can describe them as the end times, of course, if we want to talk in Christian terms. But that's why in my books, I want to unveil everything and then give the possibility to the people to make their own judgment.
And of course, people should, if they really want to go thoroughly into your work, they should get all of your books. And this is like volume.
You can also
this is
get
like the
volume
new one. The new one is volume 11, and this
and
is
you can
volume
read it.
10. And we are basically talking a little bit about both of them. But if you just wanted to sum up for the people here in our remaining moments, would you sum up what volume 10 is about and what volume 11, the new one, is about?
Well, volume 10, like I said, is Islamic Freemasonry is a subject that is not discussed, but it's a subject very vast with a lot of evidence. There is, when we talk about Hamas, we talk about a group that has been created by the Muslim Brotherhood, that was created by Freemasons. The Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who inspired modern Islam and the Salafi movement, was himself the founder of a very important Masonic obedience in Egypt before he was kicked out of Egypt. Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who everything from Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, the name sounds a bit Afghanistan. He must be, a Sunni. No, in the end, even the name was crafted so they could, because he was a Shia, and he was going back into that Shia kind of perspective, because mind control with the Assassins and the Man of the Mountain was also a form of mind control that was rehashed when they had to launch Salafi jihadism in the Sunni world. So from the Shia world, they had to transpose a form of hate that never existed in the Sunni world to start, because Sunni world was expanding, of course, with certain laws, but they were Shilvaric laws. The Nizari Assassins, they were no Shilvaric or any kind. They would come there dressed up as a woman in the middle of the night and slip your throat. It was like ninjas, they didn't have any ethics or morals. So they are the basis for the modern jihadist. And this book shows you also in the inside here on the cover, a cross. That is the cross with Mohammed on top that was discovered between Syria and Turkey in the 1950s. And it was never shown publicly. I can show it to you. It's in a depot in Istanbul. It will never be shown publicly because this is Mohammed with a turban on a cross, and it was worshipped by both the Templars and the Assassins. Now, this goes completely contrary to everything we know about Islam. They didn't want Muhammad represented. They definitely didn't want him on the cross. And so this artifact is not shown in any museum because they're afraid the museum will be blown up. Well, that's it. So this book is about revealing the secrets, the real secrets about Islam from the very birth, and all the secret societies of the Illuminati right from the beginning were involved with it in a very detailed and historical way. And so this is volume 10. Volume 11, the past, present, and future mind control from Sun Tzu, because when it comes to the art of war, that's where psychological operations. Today, we might not have MK Ultra, as because they don't need MK Ultra anymore. I mean, Michael Aquino said, we don't need the coercive, the thing. We need to find more subtle forms of mind control. And that's where they started with what became his mind war, that then was transformed in today's cognitive warfare. They use more subtle forms. They don't come to your house and start putting things in your head and pushing lights and feeding you with LSD. They don't need that. Even Timothy Leary said that the internet was the new form of LSD. So that's what this book is about, showing people that, yes, Genghis Khan, for example, people might not know it, but in modern psychological warfare schools, especially in the 4th Battalion, which is in Fort Bragg, the most known and most powerful one, an influential one, because it trains also the foreign ones, like the Danish one, get their courses there, and in the Italian, the same. Well, they teach that Genghis Khan was a great psychological warrior because he had a bunch of desperados from the Mongolian, but desperados, but pretty fierce. He conquered half of this planet. How did he do it? So then they explain. He sent these emissaries behind enemy lines, spreading all kinds of tales. Oh, Genghis Khan is so fierce, he will rape your daughters, he will kill you. He has 1 million soldiers with him. Then, once the war started, Genghis Khan was like an illusionist playing with cards. He will have maybe 10,000 men, but he will place them first on this hill, then on the other hill, then on the other hill, like a game of illusion. And the guy was, wow, he has 1 million men, you know, and basically they will surrender. So Genghis Khan was a psychological warfare operative. Sun Tzu, when he wrote The Art of War, he teach how to infiltrate the enemy, spy on him, and mind control him. And this was in ancient China. Then we have Napoleon, who said that the marches he did with his men were more important than the actual conflict in itself, because when you march, boom, boom, and the enemy is like here, is fearing you, because they get terrorized by these marching sounds. So that's why we need to understand today, when we go in any theater of war, the first units are the psychological operatives battalions. They arrive there with a unit of maybe 30 or 40 people, their computers, everything. They immerse themselves in the local culture, they understand it, and they start to plan the arrival of their own conventional warfare by simply spreading various things. You see, even Saddam Hussein knew about psychological operations, but he couldn't really activate a good psychological warfare because he had some incompetent people. And I describe this in my book. When, for example, they were doing this Radio Baghdad kind of scenario for, you know, for the American troop in English, they created this, they were saying, oh, your wives, they are having sex with Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt? Yes, and with Bart Simpson. Well, that is obviously not believable, but because they had limited knowledge of American culture, that's what the psychological operators could come out. And it was, of course, funny, to say the least. I mean, your wife is going with Brad Pitt or with Bart Simpson, I mean, with a cartoon character. It was unbelievable, and it was unbelievable because it wasn't real. It was a psychological warfare attempt. But Saddam Hussein did
it happens in all aspects of our lives.
And yes, and in November 2003, in fact, Michael Aquino, who had just given up formally his military position, he republished his Psychology of Victory essay, and he actually states there, I see all my techniques being used in Iraq today, and I'm very happy about it. So that's it.
There's so much to read and so much information, and you always provide everybody with so much knowledge and fascinating stuff. It's always a thrill, Leo. And how can people purchase your 2 books, Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10 and Volume 11?
Well, they can simply go on lyonzagami.com. There is the links to all my latest books and also the latest articles I publish, which are usually based on my latest books. So they give you an idea of the subjects, of the relevance of them. And you can, of course, also go on Amazon and find them there directly. So thank you very much for having me on, giving me the opportunity to promote these books. Because I think that what is being revealed in these books is important for what we are experiencing today. When it comes to the war in the Middle East, of course, the populations are the people who are losing in front of this, I mean, they're innocent. Generally speaking, the populations are innocent. However, when we are brainwashing a child from a very young age into violence to build up around him a situation whereby then he joins groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, that has to be interrupted. And it cannot be, unfortunately, interrupted without reforming the whole school system, because the school and the universities here in the West, we see them today, use them as recruiting centers and also as mind control operators all the time. They try to influence, believe in wokeism, believe in this, believe in that. I mean,
yes, we can see the whole thing about what's happening with the whole woke movement and the educational system, and that's a great topic for another time. But I'm sure you'll soon be out with volume 12. And then I hope to see you back again.
That is going to be probably next year, early next year.
Right.
I have already the subject. I'm going to start working on it soon, as soon as I finish the translation of this book, which is also coming out in Italian in the next few months. So I'm working also on the Italian edition. As you know, I'm
You are a busy man, Leo, and it's always a thrill, and it's wonderful to see you again, to touch base and to hear the latest. And thank you so much for explaining the content of your new book. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you for being on Age of Truth TV.
Thank you very much, Lucas. Thank you very much. It's important, though, that you understand I reveal everything I have, but I reveal it by my own perspective and experiences. I don't want to offend anybody if I'm not in line with their own experience or their own perspectives, but this is my own confessions. Otherwise, it will not be called confessions.
Absolutely, and you do it so well. Thank you so much, and I look forward to having you on the show again, as always.
Thank you, Lucas. It was a pleasure.
It was. Thank you so much to Leo Zagami, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruthtv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruthtv as well. Please also subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon. Your support is greatly appreciated and very needed. On behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.